I'm on mute. I started it on mute. What a great way to launch this Zoom-based discussion. The most 2020, 2021 thing that everyone is doing, which is to talk while unmuted. Well, hello. Hi, everyone. My name is David Bullen, and I'm the Executive Director of the King's Greek Play at King's College London. Thank you so much for joining us, particularly, I'm told by Edith, in the middle of an England game, for joining us for a discussion about From the Machine, which is this year's King's Greek play. Quite an unusual Greek play in its history, which now goes back to 53, I think, the first King's Greek play was. I'm joined today, I'm delighted to be joined today by two of Kings's experts in this material. First of all, I'm joined by Professor Edith Hall, who's in the Department of Classics. Edith has a long and storied career in relation to Greek tragedy, with numerous books under her name. I'm also joined by my laptop is happening to die right now, so 1 second. All the technical things are going wrong right now. I'm also joined by Rosa Andujar, who is Deputy Director of Liberal Arts and Lecturer in Liberal Arts at King's College London. And recently, Rosa's book, The Greek Trilogy of Luis Alfaro, which is a fantastic collection. And I'm still reeling from reading Rosa. It's a fantastic. Those plays are so brilliant. And that book recently won the 2020 London Hellenic Prize fantastically. So hello, Rosa. Hello, Edith.
Hi.
Hello.
So let me just give a kind of very, in a nutshell, overview of this year's Greek play, because it is a bit of a different Greek play compared to previous ones. So as people probably know, usually what we do at King's is just put on a play in Greek from one of the kind of extant texts that exist, either a comedy or a tragedy. But this year, with the pandemic, obviously we weren't able to stage an in-person production, and we thought that actually the prospect of maybe broadcasting an online Zoom show entirely in ancient Greek with subtitles might not be, for even the most hardcore fans, might not be the most appealing thing. So Edith and I had this idea to kind of lean into the conditions of the pandemic in terms of this year's play and create something entirely new. So we gathered together a group of students from King's and some also from UCL who sat with Edith and I through a series of workshops between January and June. And also with the theatre designer Nicola Hewitt-George to develop a new play based on some of the extant Greek tragedies. The tragedies we looked at in particularly were Iphigenia in Aulis, Euripides Orestes, Philoctetes by Sophocles, and also the fragmentary Achilles trilogy by Aeschylus. And we had a great time, Edith, did we not? We had a great time doing those sessions. And the students have produced now an entirely new play, inspired by those old plays that I think really does respond to, or kind of is a kind of cry from their generation to the public about how they feel right now during the pandemic. So it's very, very exciting. Edith, I wondered if you could kind of kick us off in our discussion by just telling us a little bit more about why you think those particular plays we chose, because I mean, you were the one that suggested to me those particular plays that we look at. Why do they connect to right now?
Well, I had my pedagogical hat on, and I'm very keen always to present students with more arcane corners of ancient Greek tragedy rather than the sort of classic 4 or 5 plays that sort of everybody reads, like Medea and Antigone and Oedipus, and particularly where we know an awful lot about and have big fragments from really important lost plays. I can't bypass the opportunity to tell them just how, there were at least 1,000 plays put on tragedies in the 5th century BCE, and we've only got 30, right? So that was one thing. But then talking to you, we decided we needed some kind of control on the plot. So we went for Trojan War. there's lots of reasons for going for Trojan War, and one of them is that there've been this huge rash of excellent recent novels by people like Pat Barker, sort of feminist versions, and Natalie Haynes, and there seems to be something. The Iliad, in particular, has never been anything like the popular culture blockbuster that the Odyssey has. Nothing like it until the 21st century. All of a sudden, especially the last decade, there's something about the total extinction of a civilization, Troy. So I found some really fantastic bits and bobs apart. That all focus. What we wanted was very young adults. Like, I've been so aware. I have children who are 21 and 22 their lives have been turned upside down. They're both university students. By loneliness, lack of social life, financial precarity, not being able to attend courses because they're putting on Japan time, having to live at home with their elderly parents, while they are also, permanently worried about bigger things, like the fact that us boomers have left the environment in the terrible state we have. I don't think, in my lifetime, there's never been such a dispossessed generation of young adults, and it's incredibly sad. And I look at the King's, my King's students, and students I talk to all around the country. I talk to a lot of sixth form colleges, the same kind of I think, incredibly self-controlled bitterness, very mature bitterness. It's not sort of loud in your face anger. It's extraordinarily mature, controlled resentment. And there's so much of that coming out of young people in tragedies surrounding the whole Trojan War cycle. And one that didn't actually get into the final cut, but I think had a huge impact, was the fragments of Euripides Alexander. The whole war, the whole story, it was kicked off by this thoroughly disgruntled young adult who'd been exposed as a baby because his mother thought that he might, burn down Troy. And then as a young adult, he's been a slave farmer, and he comes along and his mother still tries to kill him. No wonder he said to the goddesses, give me a pretty girl. He was already in that alienated state of mind before even the Judgment of Paris. And then we went for Iphigenia and Aulis because this young woman is utterly resentful at first, but is brainwashed. She is literally brainwashed. We see her before and after. The propaganda has got to work about saving, dying to save her country. And we see both her mother and her fiance actually at the last minute not really help her. These older people at the last minute just washing their hands of the whole thing, even her mother. And the fragments, I think, of the Achilles trilogy by Aeschylus, which is one of the greatest losses. I mean, the tragic Iliad. And Aeschylus went straight for the jugular on the relationship between Achilles and Patroclus in a way that Homer didn't. Homer evaded the issue of their actual physical sexual bond. And Euripides, very seriously, clearly making it quite obvious that this is the number one relationship in Orestes' life. They don't actually talk about sex. The fragments of Aeschylus's Myrmidons, it's right there. Achilles is weeping all through the play and going on about remembering snuggling down between Patroclus's thighs. I mean, it's very erotic and it's very tragic. So I could see this younger generation who have another issue they're very angry with boomers about, which is our sort of compulsory heterosexuality, the whole hippie generation thing, the whole sexuality of the 60s and early 70s that was celebrated at Woodstock and so on was extremely binary and cis. And this is just not tolerable to the young anymore. It's simply unacceptable in every way. And so I could feel them responding to all of this, as could you. And what was so glorious about it was these winter nights. It was pitch dark outside. It was January Tuesday evenings, and at 5 o'clock, pitch black. We would all come together for 2 or 3 hours of real discovery. And for me, always pedagogically, to see the reactions of teenagers and young adults to the sheer emotional honesty of Greek tragedy is such a revelation. They just love this no holds barred, I'm going to kill you, I hate you stuff. You know, they can't stand niceties and etiquette and sort of middle class evasion, and that's why teens and Greek tragedians will always be a perfect marriage, as Nat Haynes has said. I also draw a lot, and I must say this, I had a wonderful PhD student called Matthew Shipton, who is now an administrator at City University. He has a, excellent career, but he wrote this wonderful doctrine that became a book called Youth, the Politics of Youth in Greek Tragedy. And it was an experience of supervising him, another pedagogical experience that really made me think hard about how young people get to speak their minds in Greek tragedy, which they did not in Athenian reality. Men were discouraged from even speaking up in the assembly till they were 30. They were all conscripted, the boys, and died in vast numbers, as we can tell from everything in Thucydides. And the girls are married off the minute they have their first period to people not of their choice, and frequently die in childbirth and have no public voice at all. So when you've got an Iphigenia or a Neoptolemus or an Orestes, so it became very clear how loudly they were resonating, but particularly the Orestes, this particular play, which was rather paradoxical because, of course, it was the Oxford Greek play this year. But it may be paradoxical, but in fact, that shows how much a certain tone, because there's something about that bleak, it's Euripides' funniest play by far, except possibly the Helen. You know, it's incredibly funny, but the humour is absolutely saturnine. It's murderous humour as the only resort when you are so dispossessed, a completely dysfunctional family, children not just of sort of divorce, but of, mass murder. And then they've got to pick up the social chaos pieces. It's quite clear that Argos is split down the middle, just like Brexit, just like Trump, split down the middle between different factions. And the young people are left, Orestes is basically supposed to be king now, but, what's he supposed to do? So we had a really wonderful time. I think I've never heard of any creative exercise like it because, I came in and sort of, I hope, a bit inspired them. You came in with your amazing, and Nicola, dramaturgical hats on and helped shape their response into a new narrative, but they wrote it. So that is the other reason why I've always loved theatre, is the collaboration. It's a naturally socialistic theatre is socialism in practice, because any one piece disappearing, the whole thing, it's that collectivity. So it's been an absolute joy to me. I'm very interested in, well, people will see the play, but how they found the one real bum note in the ancient sources was Helen. Now, Helen is the boomer who caused the lot, according to the Greek sources. She's the 40-something who's in Argos with the incredibly dispossessed 20-somethings. And so they decide to kill her. Huh, why not? Let's just kill. And the judgments on her, the misogyny of them, rang a real bell with the young. And I thought that was fantastic, because the one way in which they are not like Orestes, Philoctetes and Electra is that they're immediately blaming everything on this one woman who had one affair, when all the men could have as many affairs as they wanted. One woman had one affair, and let's all just like lynch mob her. And I thought that showed that actually our younger generation could be the ones who are definitely going to save the world, because they are not judgmental like Orestes and Pylades. They share all their wrath, but not their vindictiveness. So it's been a moral journey as well as a pedagogical one and a recreational one. Thank you for inviting me to join in. I have to just tell the audience that you and I have been up to stuff for 11 years now. Our relationship is 11 years.
Yeah.
So I taught David from his first year at Royal Holloway. And we've done a play before. We did a version of Aristophanes' Clouds to save Royal Holloway, where Royal Holloway was the frontisterion and been taken over by bad guys. We did agitprop theatre. We also share a birthday, so he's very much my kind of well, he's sort of my adoptive son, but with a little bit of little sibling too.
Well, do you know, Edith, I think we might need to have, this is a topic for another day, but we might need to revive that Clouds at Royal Holloway sometime soon.
I think so.
Recently, I don't know if anyone's seen those news, but anyway, I was going to say, I forgot to say this in the beginning, but if you're watching this and you have a question based on what we're talking about, please do put it into the live chat and we'll be able to see that and respond to it. But I was going to ask you, Rosa, because actually when we were, I mean, I kind of want to ask you the same question as Edith, but I was thinking particularly about as we were writing this piece, as the students were writing this piece, that way that actually, I mean, there are professional writers who have been responding to this, and you've been, you obviously just edited the collection of Luis Alfaro's plays, but there are a whole range of recent receptions that are kind of responding in the way that students have to the kind of viscerality, to the kind of the bitterness, to the problems that are presented in these plays. And I wondered if you could kind of, you had any thoughts on that you could, you wanted to share with us.
Well, in terms of actual, so it's an interesting collection of plays, as you mentioned, I guess, that you're kind of grouping together. So off the top of my head, I mean, I can think of sort of individual plays and things that respond or use sort of the theme of the Trojan War. But I mean, I guess thinking very specifically about the ones that you've used, like Philoctetes is a play that I know, I mean, is not very well adapted across sort of the context in which I work on, which is sort of Latin America and the Caribbean. But I know there was a Chilean play in 2004 that was, it was basically centered on loneliness and isolation, and already just basically using Philoctetes as a figure that kind of stands in, or sort of, as a figure that allows the dramatist to kind of explore the psychological trauma of sort of being in today's society, and sort of dealing with all the demands of today's society. But generally, I mean, I think, I think a lot of us who work on sort of adaptations of Greek drama, I mean, there is so much material out there that is about sort of the more canonical, or the more sort of well-known Antigones and Medeas and all that. So I should say, I mean, I haven't seen this play. I'm very much looking forward to joining our audience at 7 o'clock and watching it live. But I actually have questions for you both, and sort of in drawing these plays together, because I mean, just thinking specifically about the collection of plays, I mean, I guess in a way you've done, a late play of Sophocles, a couple of very late plays from Euripides, right? And all the brilliant things that Edith has said in terms of sort of, the focus on that new generation. But I'm interested in how that constellation of plays worked with Achilles. I mean, I guess Achilles is basically, I'm intrigued by all the things you said about, in a way, maybe in ways in which the Trojan War kind of resonates in terms of, sort of the killing off a civilization. But Achilles as a figure is one that actually plays a very important role. And I'm just interested in him as a tragic character, and how he is, I guess, conceived in this whole, I guess, in a nexus of plays that's about a younger generation. What is Achilles' role? And I mean, as Edith said, in terms of sort of looking at the wonderful fragments that we have from Aeschylus, I mean, he's someone, I mean, well, famously, we have all those things from Aristophanes' Frogs about, that in the Myrmidons, right? Achilles was kind of just silent and veiled and quiet. And I don't know if there's a joke in there about like a sullen teenager, but his role generally in the Trojan War, obviously, I'm just interested because he's always seen as sort of like a hero he's on the younger end of these heroes, but he does rage at Agamemnon, and Agamemnon is in various sort of literary depictions, sort of seen as a more authoritative figure, and he's kind of this younger. So I'm just interested in these dynamics, and especially how Achilles fits into this other younger generation of the children of the heroes, and how you kind of meshed all that together. So I'd love to hear more, and I'm sure, I mean, I hope we're not spoiling anything for our audiences, but I just would love to see basically what Achilles looks like along. I mean, what is his role with Orestes and Iphigenia? I mean, these are clearly people of the younger generation. And as sort of Edith said, also the other wonderful stuff about Achilles. I mean, I guess we kind of see him. I mean, well, in the Aeschylus, right? There's all those fragments that explicitly talk about his relationship with Patroclus and the thighs, and there's all this. So we are in. There's a way in which, I guess, on the tragic stage, we're sort of invited to look at Achilles as kind of this more passionate, this Achilles is the lover, right? And then, I mean, in the Iphigenia at Aulis, I mean, he's there as well, but there's all this stuff and all these wonderful choral songs about that are about reenacting the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, but are actually about the supposed wedding that is about to happen between Achilles and Iphigenia. So it's about, again, Achilles as a lover. So I just want to hear a bit more about Achilles as a character, given sort of all his, sort of the wonderful role, all the roles that he plays across Homeric epic tragedy, and sort of what he looks like in your in the adaptation that we're about to see today.
That's so interesting to pull that out, and again, I think it's also interesting that we're in a rare position with the King's Greek play that we're saying all spoilers. We're in a genuine place of spoilers. It's quite unusual for us. Normally we all know how it ends. We've staged Medea, we know what's going to happen. Yeah, well, I think that's an interesting question, and to answer it a little bit briefly from a kind of dramaturgical point of view, and I'm coming off the back of the Oxford's annual APGRD postgraduate symposium came to see the show yesterday, and then this morning there was a respondent who was responding to the first day of papers, but also responding to the performance, and that was Marcella Ward at Oxford, and she said something that I'm really thinking about, or I've been thinking about all day, which is about the way that if these characters, just like kind of we are right now, are kind of haunted present by their pasts, and the way that right now we're kind of haunted by our Zoom screens all the time. We're haunted by the prospect of the inability to connect with people, inability to connect with previous generations, and indeed that's kind of what happens in our play. We get characters who are kind of simultaneously haunted by Zoom screens and also by characters, and I think Achilles is when I've been thinking about this, the ghost that hangs over, I think, in some ways the whole play. He's the lost, in some ways he's the lost youth. He is that lost promise that has died young. We know there's that the prophecy that Achilles gets, right, that that you can go to Troy and die young but gloriously, or you can stay home and live a kind of miserable and happy maybe but anonymous life, and so he is that kind of symbol of the lost youth that has been kind of vanished into this kind of war project, this military project. And I think what's also interesting in our production is that Achilles is doubled with Neoptolemus, so that actually in some ways we don't quite get into the kind of tragic Achilles in our piece, but we do get Neoptolemus, and so you kind of get he is quite literally the descended, but also kind of he's always coming out of the shadow of his father. He exists in the shadow of that famous father, and I think that is played with a little bit in the piece. I mean, what do you think, Edith, in terms of that?
Well, as I said, the spoilers was the first word that came into my head. I think that our experience, the week we researched Aeschylus's tragic Iliad, was actually the most important in terms of turning point for how we're going to do it, even though Achilles doesn't end up as a central character, not a central character. The time didn't bother us at all. David is so incredibly clever with, as the Greek tragedians were. I've been editing Agamemnon. I mean, you can take 8 hours in a story that's gone on for 3 generations and unpack everything through dreams and memories and portents and Zoom screens and, prophets, whatever. That's where the ability to write good drama out of disparate materials comes in, and David has done a magnificent job as stitcher, as rhapsode of the songs. But I think that Neoptolemus, I mean, I have been researching Neoptolemus separately, because Neoptolemus, I will spoil it, will say, is a very good guy in our production, because we only really do him through the Philoctetes. Okay, so it's all about how a young person with 2 competing older men, father figures, he's lost his own father, the battle for his soul, and how he manages to come to some kind of independence, at least moral independence of Ulysses by 2/3 of the way through. But Neoptolemus is also one of Greek myth's worst bad guys. I mean, what happens after the war? The only reason I got very interested in what on earth happened to Achilles' shield. The shield of Achilles. What happened to it? All right, we know that Odysseus won it, not Ajax, because of the Ajax and other things. But actually, in one of the cycling epics, he simply gave it to Neoptolemus. And Neoptolemus held it while he murdered Priam on an altar. He held it while he threw the baby Astyanax off the walls of Troy. And he turns dialectically in Greek myth, you know, there's a good side to Achilles and a bad side to Achilles, and Neoptolemus inherits both of them. So I think there's a bit of a ... in our play. It's like, is this much vaunted hero who's the one who finally got the Greeks out of Troy and is such a fine, moral, upstanding young man that he could say boo to his commanding officer when he saw somebody in agony? You know, is he such a clean-cut guy? So we tried to complicate everything, but that was an incredibly insightful question because we talked so much about Achilles. Yes, his ghost and spirit, and the sacrificial lamb aspect of very young men being packed off, who say, what's the point of it all? It's not even for me. You know, I'm not going to earn the money, and you take away my girlfriend, you know, and you take away my tripods or whatever. So that is really crucial. But the choice of Orestes, as I said earlier, coming back to that play, that was not planned. And in fact, David and I were a bit resistant because it had been the Oxford Greek play. Put on, I may say, one of the directors was one of our previous huge collaborators, Marcus Bell. I mean, it's, you know, we tried to persuade the young away from it. What they've done, though, is completely rewrite the second half and remove the focus onto the boomer, as you will see. What do we do with the boomer? So that it is completely new. The first half, there's a lot of Orestes in it. The second half is all come from them, as have, I think, the best written scene of them all, which has two women talking that never actually meet in Greek drama.
It's very exciting, I have to say. I mean, I'm personally very partial to plays like the Orestes that are kind of like multicast. They bring all the people together, and it's like, oh no, it's not just Orestes and Electra. It's also Helen and Menelaus. It's like, let's just zoom out a little bit and see what else is happening.
And that's the Euripidean surprise. People think that everybody always knew what was going to happen in Greek tragedy. The actual hypothesis, which means the note made by a Hellenistic scholar in the Library of Alexandria, probably at the front of the papyrus that Orestes was on, said this plot lies, he says, by no other author. Yeah, nobody's ever heard of this plot of Orestes whatsoever in anything else. Now that means Euripides was freely inventing on stage, which meant that he had his audience on the edge of their wooden icria, which is the word for benches, as they watched. He was totally prepared to throw away the plot book and freely invent completely new plot lines, which is exactly what we're doing. We are being incredibly Euripidean by chucking out how the plot is supposed to go to fit our own times. You know, the other thing the hypothesis writer actually says is the play is more of the comic type. He could hear, even in that boring library in Alexandria, as he read this script, he could see how funny it was, and was clearly rather bothered by it. Like, how can the tragic of the poets, as Aristotle called Euripides, also be the funniest? Well, I think modern theatre sensibilities know that the two go together hand in glove.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and I'm pleased that we're Euripidean. You know, of all the three tragedians to be like, I'm happy that we're attacking that model. And I think what's very interesting in the way that actually thinking about contemporary playwrights, you know, on that front is actually because on those Tuesday evenings in January, we were looking at these ancient plays, but subsequently throughout the process, what we've seen, and I've seen as I've been kind of stitching together the students' work, is the real presence of actually major contemporary playwrights. The playwright Debbie Tucker Green is in this, is present so much, and actually we ended up naming one of the final scenes after a Debbie Tucker Green play, Truth and Reconciliation, because the questions that Debbie Tucker Green puts to audiences, which are...
We just got a goal. I just heard my husband scream.
I heard, I'm in a hotel and I even heard someone screaming.
Anybody joining us, I guess, there's an England game going on right now, and the ruckus is such that all three of us, I think I could hear it through your screen as well. Surround sound.
What, you heard my husband through your screen?
Oh.
Oh well, there we go. That's we've got the two passions: Greek tragedy and England and national football. I completely forgotten whatever I was talking about.
David, I'm going to have to go down and watch in a minute.
Well, Professor and I'll chat. I don't mind it.
No, I think you were talking about the ways in which sort of more contemporary playwrights were coming in to your workshops and sessions. Which
Yeah.
It makes absolute sense. I think obviously I'm personally very interested in the ways in which people approach these plays. Obviously there's, audiences have a key role in sort of, making sense and, and making meaning of these plays. And people, reception theory is always talking about the horizon of expectation of the audience. So absolutely, I think it makes sense that for a creative process such as that you're describing, that people are bringing in sort of other resonances or other plays or other adaptations and sort of, reflecting that back onto the ancient source. I think that's all part and parcel and part of the joy of what we all do and sort of, thinking about ancient theater and its modern resonance.
Absolutely, and I think that's in some ways what I've quite enjoyed on this project. I've enjoyed all the Greek plays that I've worked on at King's, and I've worked with Greek tragedy a lot. In fact, actually, one of the reasons why Edith and I personally tried to push back against Orestes is because at present I'm working on not one but two other versions of that play. It's for different theatre projects, and so I'm a bit over Orestes or whatever the word would be there. But yeah, I think why I've enjoyed that quite a lot is because of the way that the students have really synthesized, the ancient material, but whether it's in terms of content or in terms of form, they've brought in contemporary playwrights into it. There's one moment in the play, and again, I don't want to give spoilers, but I think it's so very Carol Churchill. It's so very.
I was thinking Sarah Kane, Phaedra's Love, actually.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. Yeah. As well. So Sarah Kane.
Her Hippolytus on his couch, sort of reading porn and eating popcorn and getting fat, and just because actually having sex with anyone else is just too boring, and it's just that's 1996 actually. So it's a little bit, it was definitely prescient, but there's a huge tonality of that cynical opting out. The other one that I thought of a lot was Neil Laboute and Bash, Latter Day Plays, which is three versions of Greek tragedy, including the Iphigenia and Aulis and the Medea. I can't remember what the third one was, but set in déclassé, working class American homes, but with that kind of casually bitchy interchange going on. And I think some of the scenes are so well written from that point of view, just really, really 21st century. What's that trendy word for shade? I have to try and keep up with my children's vocabulary.
Not to be confused with Achilles' shade.
Yeah, I know. Do you know what I mean, though? A lot of people casting
shade and shade in this.
Yes.
Shades and shade. Shades throwing shade, indeed. That in this.
In fact, we could do a whole new play just called Shade.
Yes. Can part of it be set in the underworld?
Yes.
I'd love that. But actually,
come on board, Rosa, please.
Well, do you know, I was thinking of exactly that. Shade, another playwright who I think work kind of has sort of crept in here and it's kind of its dreamlike qualities is Caridad Svitch, who has a brilliant version of Iphigenia in Aulis that does deal exactly with kind of shades. It's about kind of the underworld in that sense, and kind of the disconnections and connections between underworld and overworld, and what that might mean within various different kind of political locations.
I guess the one thing we haven't really talked about is how or maybe we should have Bruce and our tech people on for this, but how the technology has altered the way the students approach this. It didn't really alter the way I approached it, because I'm not a theatre maker. I just had to sit here and give one of, some of the many, hundreds of lectures I've given online over the last 16 months. I gave 10-minute introductions to these materials, and then we would have a seminar and back questions. But they wrote it differently because of lockdown. And I think you know more about that. I wish you'd seen it recently, because you would be able to comment on that more. But they devised scenes in ways that were designed to be delivered in a particular way, on a multi-screen or whatever. Would that be good to talk about?
Yes, please. Zoom theater. I mean, everybody's talking about it.
Oh, is there a word for it?
I think so.
well, kind of Zoom craft is the thing that I've heard, is the term I've heard bandied around. I think it's really interesting. I said at the beginning, kind of, not half jokingly, that actually, if you staged a Greek tragedy on, in Greek on Zoom, we'd lose all of our viewers in the first, 15 minutes. Well, actually, maybe that's generous. That's 15 seconds probably, because, and I think what's really interesting is that, and I always think this every time I'm working with ancient drama, is that those plays were so brilliantly written for a particular space. They were written for a particular space, and you can really see that in the kind of dramaturgy of it. And that makes so much sense when you think about it in that location, which is why actually I think quite often Greek tragedy kind of struggles sometimes when it's adapted just with the text straight into a kind of indoor kind of proscenium arch theatre. It's quite difficult to access that. But the students completely dismantled that and rebuilt it around the possibilities of, well, what happens if your only dramatic device is a Zoom call?
Amazing.
What do you do? And indeed, the play's in 3 parts, and the part 2 was written, or was always intended to be, a Zoom conversation. We originally planned for parts 1 and 3 to be performed in a kind of location and kind of make a hybrid performance where we would sort of splice in part 2 through Zoom, and obviously that didn't manifest. But and what's interesting is then seeing the way that they have then adapted parts 1 and 3, originally written for again in-person performance, to a kind of Zoom craft. And actually, what's interesting, I think, is quite telling, is that yesterday in the performance we had a technical hitch. We had a technical hitch where actually Helen's camera wouldn't turn on. We had the stage direction reads, and we do read the stage directions in the piece, just for kind of, because some of it was written originally for live performance, so we're sort of framing it as a reading. The stage direction was read out, the sound of a Zoom call, and then of course nothing happened because Helen couldn't turn on the thing. But all the audience, when we said, "Oh, sorry, this is a technical hitch, we'll be with you in a second," the audience started posting into the chat saying, "Oh, we just thought that was the sound of a Zoom call, nothing working, or there being a problem." So I think actually, and I think that is one of the ways that actually this play, I think, seems to be connecting with audiences based on what was said yesterday, is that actually it engages with this really familiar mode of communication that we've all had to become familiar with in the last however long now, more than a year. So it connects in both kind of in terms of what the anxieties people are feeling, but also the kind of form of their anxieties, which is expressed through these silly screens. I know when I first saw some colleagues a few weeks ago in person, I was kind of like, oh my God. When I came to see you, Edith, when we had our chat, I was like, an actual human in a space. It's not me.
We had a hug. We had a hug and a gin.
Was it an illegal hug? I can't remember if it was at that point, but yeah.
Well, if Matt Hancock's allowed a squeeze, I can hug my old mate, right?
Yeah, it was certainly not in that order of things. Yeah.
Sadly, no. You're a great loss to womankind, David.
My husband, agrees. So yeah, well, we've got a couple of more minutes before we're due to end. I'm sorry, Edith, to extend your pain away from the football, but Rosa, is there anything else that you had thoughts you wanted to say, or things you wanted to ask, or things you wanted to kind of talk about?
I mean, no, I mean, I'm just really excited to see it. I think what you guys are doing basically is, very much within sort of the flavor of Greek tragedy. I mean, I think I always like to remind my students and anybody who's interested, that there's no sort of canonical repository of myths, so there's something to be said about the ways in which not just Euripides, all tragedians, sort of are reworking this material and kind of like giving it new spins and finding new depths. And so I think that sort of bringing together, say, I don't know, the Achilles trilogy of Aeschylus and then these sort of later plays of Sophocles and Euripides together is great. This is why can't we find a lost tragedy? Maybe we will find a lost tragedy that did precisely this. So this is not radical. This is very much in keeping with the spirit of Greek tragedy. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that I think is what's great about this is the way that kind of a project like this does refresh and remind us of what those texts were, which is not, I often say to students when I teach Greek tragedy that these texts weren't written to be classics, they weren't written to be canonical. They were written, and I think this again, particularly with Euripides, that he's writing for a specific moment, he knows this play is going to be performed at one location on one day, one place, and he takes no prisoners with that in terms of what he does. And I think that's to work in this way, with the material in this way, reminds us of that.
Well, the last thing I would like to say, in case any of my King's Classics department colleagues are watching, is I really hope we can take lessons away from this year into our we hope, proper theatre space productions in the future. It's been an amazing opportunity to access the really remarkable creative skills of our students. They're not just good at ancient Greek and ancient tragedy and classical theatre. They are hugely creative, and we may have a blended format, whatever, but I do hope we don't lose some of the really original power that has come out of this year. And last year's was magnificent, that the combination of the Bacchae and the frogs and David's writing, but this, because it came from the actual hearts of the young, seems to me to be truer to the spirit of what a true university should be. And I'm looking at you, King's Management, as well as
and Royal Holloway's management as well, may I say.
Exactly, as well as true to the pedagogical process, which is meant to be the teacher as a midwife of other people's children and ideas. So I hope we don't go back to absolutely straight up versions of Greek tragedy, even with subtitles. I hope there will always be room for a bit more creative input from the rising generation. There is
a question that's just come in, but it's 6:45, and which does mean we're out of time. So I'm sorry to Wendy who's asked that question. I'm really sorry that we don't have time to answer it. I have to be quite strict. I'm under strict instructions from our technical.
You have to go direct to play, for heaven's sake.
Well, all theatre directors know that when you reach the end of the rehearsal space, it's the technicians who are in charge now. As soon as stage management take over, and I'm very happy with that. So unfortunately, Wendy, I do have to cut things off at this time because we need to prepare the kind of Zoom room, as it were, for the show. But thank you for that question. I wonder if we can find a way to answer it for you in another way. Don't worry, we'll find a way to answer that for you, Wendy. Okay, thank you so much, Edith. Thank you so much, Rosa. Thank you for joining me for this chat. I've really enjoyed it as a kind of warm up to today's show. It's lovely to see you both. Unfortunately not in person. I wish this was an in-person chat, but alas, Zoom is the moment, the form of our moment right now. And yeah. So in about 15 minutes time, the show will be starting. The link to the show, to the YouTube where that will be starting, is in the description for this video. And if you are a ticket holder for tonight, you should also have been emailed with that information as well. So yeah. So thank you very much, Rosa, Edith, and thank you, audience. I hope you enjoy the show, and please do tell us what you think. Thanks.
Thank you.